welcome everyone. I am so glad that you're here to support authors and readers and of course Grassroots books. I'm Ashley, the event and social media coordinator for Grassroots, and we're in Corvallis, Oregon. Tonight we have our second event of Romance Literature Month with author Vanessa Riley and executive editor Essie Sogah. Romance Literature Month is an event series designed to help us all celebrate love in all its forms all throughout February. Historically, romantic literature has been a snubbed genre dismissed from literary circles, though romance novels, of course, serve an important functions to readers and writers and literary communities. This month is aimed at romance literacy and romance appreciation, celebrating the stories that help us define, explore, and of course, celebrate love. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers tonight. Vanessa Riley is an award-winning author of Regency and Historical Romance, featuring dazzling multicultural communities and powerful persons of color. To fuel her interest in the Regency and early Victorian eras, she made time for attending Renaissance fairs and consuming period novels and films, while obtaining her Ph.D. in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. She is a member of Romance Writers of America and the Historical Novel Society, as well as a Christian Book Lovers board member. A frequent speaker at women's events, she lives in Georgia with her military husband and teenage kid. Essie Sogah, executive editor, joined the Kensington Publishing Corporation in 2013. Her list includes authors such as Dr. Jen Gunter, Vanessa Riley, Kate Claiborne, and Aya de Leon. She is looking to acquire romance, mystery, upmarket fiction, and nonfiction. So here's the way that this will work tonight. Vanessa and Essie will engage in conversation, and then we'll open up the floor to a Q&A from audience members for the last 15 or 20 minutes or so. Please feel free to use the Q&A box to indicate if you have a question at any point during the presentation. Afterwards, we'll be using that to run the Q&A portion of tonight's event. I will also be posting the link to buy Vanessa's book, The Duke, a Lady, and a Baby, in the chat shortly. I highly encourage you to buy it from us. Not only will you be supporting Vanessa as an author, but also Grassroots as a small indie bookstore that is able to bring events like this to you. So, all that being said, let me hand it over.
Thank you so much. Hi, Vanessa.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I feel like that is sort of the question of the era, the loaded question. How are you these days? How, in these pandemic times that we are still living in.
I know. I actually went out of the house today.
Oh, that's big for you.
I know.
I did not go out of the house today. Or yesterday, now that I think about it. Wednesday, I left the house.
And big thing, mask, double mask.
I double masked. On Wednesday, did I double mask? Yes, Wednesday I double masked. I did. Sometimes I have a couple masks that you can like slot a filter into. So I've done that. Mostly I just stay inside though.
No, I do. So
yeah, so exactly. Yeah. With books, which, brings me to the first thing I want to talk about, which is romance reading in the pandemic. Have you found yourself reading more romances, talking to people more about reading romances during this time? What's it been like for you?
I have found myself going back to my favorites. I want, it's the draw to something safe and secure, and I already know how it's going to end, has been very comforting to me. It's just, this is the time frame where there's been so much anxiety, trying to work through the pandemic, the elections, just changes of just every different phase of life. Are we going to get back to normal? What is normal? So I've been going back and just reading my favorites. What about you?
Exactly the same. I am just going to give a personal shout out and a thank you to Lisa Kleypas, because she has really kept me going during this pandemic. I return to her time and again. I've also found myself rereading by listening to audiobooks, and I'm not a huge audiobook listener. I hadn't been before the pandemic, but I live alone, and so having that like voice in my ear has been comforting. Plus it's a story I know already, so I'm like, I know this is going to end if I sort of lose my attention, which is why I don't often listen to audiobooks because I can lose my place easily. I'm like, it's not as big a deal because I know what's going to be happening. But I've had a few friends start reading romance novels during the pandemic. And that has been extremely entertaining for me because I get these like hysterical text chains from at 2 a.m. when they're like 3 deep in Sarah MacLean's Bare Knuckle Bastard series. And I'm like, welcome to the joy that is romance.
I have so many friends who have friends that were outside the romance community who are like, I get it now. I get it. It's like this has been like ultimate validation.
Yeah.
It's quite funny to watch.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of go-to romances that you recommend to new readers?
Yes. I always will recommend, this is my shelf of unforgettables. So I will always recommend Something Like Love. Some people are Indigo fans, and I love that, but
I raise my hand as an Indigo fan.
Yeah, Something Like Love. I just love her humor that came through. That to me, it just touched me so much. Is the humor plus the drama of the situation. So Something Like Love, like Beverly Jenkins, is my favorite. Is one of my faves. The Duke and I by Julia Quinn.
Yep.
You know, you can't mix.
Reread that during the pandemic.
I was rereading it and be like, wait a minute. That speech, I feel it. The burn. I was like, I know it's there somewhere. And it's thread through.
Yes.
So I was like, yes. I seldom, I don't know if many people got this one. This is Bertina Cron's The Perfect Mistress.
I have not read that in so long.
I adore that. That is typically a once a year read for me.
All right, I might be.
It's one of those famous, we're going to fake courting books, right?
The best. We're going to talk about tropes in a minute because I have many thoughts about favorite tropes, but yes, the best. I just reread or listened to Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase, which is, I would say there have been 2 romance novel reads in my life where I actually like stood up and shouted at something that happened. And if you've read Lord of Scoundrels, you know what it was. And rereading it was just so joyful and sort of brought back all those feelings I had of like discovering romance for the first time and all these things that could happen. And I just think, speaking of The Duke and I and Bridgerton and the Bridgerton phenomenon, seeing all these people who had never really thought about romance before discover romance and like, people talk about happily ever after or happily for now. And obviously, I think those are important to romance, but I think people sometimes then lose sight of like, people aren't reading it just for the happily ever after, right? Like and I think Bridgerton, the show, sort of clues people into that whole journey that we enjoy when reading a romance.
I mean, it's just, if it was just the happily ever after, you would be cheating. But it's that journey of seeing 2 people struggling with their goals, struggling with their beliefs, the lies they've been telling themselves, watching them heal, and then succumb or fall into love. I think it's just an amazing thing.
Yeah. That was another one where it was just very fun over the holiday to start getting the texts from friends who started Bridgerton at 10 o'clock at night after their families went to bed, assuming they'd watch 1 or 2 episodes.
3 a.m. Christmas morning, and I told my family, he's over there. I'm out. I'll cook later.
Goes in front of the tree. I had a friend who said that her mother and sister took naps after they opened presents, and then they were just sort of hanging out. They're like, "Oh, we feel so bad. We left you all alone." And she's like, "It's fine. I was fine. I was watching Bridgerton." I know one of the things that's happened during this Bridgerton time, people have been talking a lot about the Black characters on the show and, historical accuracy versus historical fantasy. And I know you talk a lot about that, particularly when it comes to people of color in history. And I was just wondering if you wanted to talk, I know people have come to you for some of your expertise in that, and I am doing the same. What do you have to say about some of the diversity that we get to see in Bridgerton and in your books?
Well, one, I love it because for a very long time, all we've seen is almost an idealized version of the Regency. We only see stories about the ton, which is the wealthiest of the wealthiest, the select group, the dukes, the earls, etc. Sometimes people will be daring enough to throw in some princes and stuff like that, but most of the time they but that's all you see. And the thing is, that's not how history was. I mean, in truth, there have been over 10,000 books written with a duke in it. There were only 28 dukes, and only 2 were hot.
Right.
Okay.
Which ones?
I can't remember because I can't remember titles. I'll get you some titles, but only 2 were hot. All the rest of them were old. It was not the rip down. So it's like when you talk about historical fantasy, historical accuracy, if you really want it accurate, you're going to see some really bad teeth, really stinky people, poop in the streets, and only 2 with ripped abs.
They weren't all down at Gentleman Jackson's fostering every day.
So
it's unfortunate.
So, and then you look at, there were between 20 to 30,000 free Blacks living in London during the time of Jane Austen. So there's, in Pride and Prejudice, the scene where Darcy is going through the streets and he's got the lantern and the little boy is running up and giving him a little tankard of ale, and he's looking for Wickham and Lydia. On that particular street in that part of town, he should have seen someone of color, because that's where they were living during that time frame. And you see nothing but, all you see is white people, white poor people in that particular area. And the thing is, if you're going to be historically accurate, you should have at least seen 1 or 2, because there were free people working in the docks, free people working in the streets, setting up carts, bun makers. There's a drugstore, or not a drugstore, but like a general services store, all the way up to millionaires. There's one particular millionaire that made his money by determining that rich folks didn't like to get their own coal. So he literally would deliver coal to the houses, and he made a fortune and became one of the wealthiest men in this particular area and whatnot. Black man. So these are stories that just aren't told. And it's been my passion to kind of tell the stories. We think about Jane Austen, right? We love Pride and Prejudice. We love, Persuasion, but her very last book, San Ditton, the wealthiest, or Sanditon, still don't know how.
I don't know.
I'm Southern. One of those 2, right? The wealthiest woman in the book, Miss Lamb, is a mulatto woman from the West Indies. And everybody is scheming on her to marry her because of her wealth. So that in itself, when you have Jane Austen, who lived during the times we're writing about, she's writing of this story. It's not an aberration. This is what she's seeing. She's not a Regency writer. She's a contemporary writer. She's writing what she's seeing. So
right.
So many stories that just aren't sold. And so I feel very fortunate, very privileged to be able to tell stories.
Yeah, I find that so interesting that in that conversation that comes up, I think, particularly in the romance part of literature, particularly in historical romance, people have the idea of what's real and what's fake flipped. So not only do they think, oh, you wouldn't have seen Black people at that time, but they also think if you saw them, like, everyone would be talking about it, right? It would be remarked upon, and no one would treat it like this is just something that happens in the everyday. I feel like I saw some of that conversation around Bridgerton where they were like, why is everybody acting so comfortable? And I'm like, probably because they would have been. I don't know. I'm not a historian, but it seems to me that seems far more likely, especially in England at the time. The British Empire was, the sun never sets on the British Empire was a real thing. So you're having British people all over the world marry, come back, have children. And so, yeah, your point that the contemporary depictions we sort of grew up seeing of this time period don't actually reflect what the people of the time would have been thinking and doing.
You will always find people who have prejudicial views, very exclusive. But my thing is, I'm not going to hang out with them. I will know who they are. I'm going to go to the good parties. I'm going to go. And there are people that, if certain stations in society, typically like the Prince Regent, he picked certain blacks or blackamoors that he sponsored. So they went to the best parties. Bill Richardson, the boxer, was one of his favorites. So he was there. The night of his coronation, where he becomes George IV, he's got him at the party, and they're all socializing, and no one is saying, "Oh, look at that black man over there." They would probably say, "Look at that ripped back man," because he was a
Exactly.
It's like you pick and choose what you want to believe and what you want to do, and I believe in telling these stories that show an intersection of society where people are just figuring out how to, all these other things. It's not always focused on race. It's all these other things, and they're all just trying to find their happy ever after.
Speaking of, you mentioned the West Indies, which of course feature heavily in the series we work on together, Rogues and Remarkable Women, A Duke's a Lady and a Baby, available now, and coming up, an Earl, a Girl, and a Toddler. So I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What made you decide on the West Indies?
I was doing lots and lots more research, and I wanted to tell these stories. My father's from Trinidad and Tobago, so I get a lot of this culture, and I wanted to bring these stories. And primarily, little lady back there, Island Queen, Dorothy Kerwin Thomas, is a phenomenal woman that I actually wrote. My first historical fiction book will be coming out in July of her story. But everything you think you know about how Black women have been able to navigate Regency society will blow your mind. She was one of the wealthiest women. She starts enslaved. She becomes one of the wealthiest women in the West Indies. She has an affair with Prince William Henry, the future King William IV. She's renting houses whenever she goes to London, taking her 15 grandkids and everybody with her. I mean, it's just, there's a point where she has to make this really large statement, and she rents a carriage, like the most obnoxious, largest carriage with 6 horses, all these coachmen, because she wants to make this obnoxious point of her wealth. And these are not stories that are ever told.
Yeah.
So once again, I feel very fortunate being able to bring these. And you get snippets of Demerara and some of the different islands like Jamaica in our series. So I'm very excited to be able to tell these stories. And once again, feel very privileged because, these stories weren't told. They haven't been told. I'm excited.
And I remember how excited the whole company was when, I first got your books in, because it is always so fun to work on something new and something that you have been waiting for. And I think everyone too, your research is so good. And for me, that's part of the fun too. I'm reading the books and I'm just having like this great time working on them when I'm editing them. And then I get to the end and there's all these like amazing historical facts that I find myself sort of like making a separate reading list of things I want to go and look up and just learn more about, that I think also readers maybe will find really surprising, the things that are true in your books. Is there any sort of historical facts that over your writing career you've been like, wow, I can't believe this is real and I get to put it in this novel, like no one's gonna believe I didn't make this up?
I learned very early on that if I didn't put a detailed author's note, I get these fabulous reviews that say, her book was great and I Googled it and she was right. I'm gonna save you that trouble.
And you're like,
go ahead, put it down.
I know. Right.
But there's just odd things like the coal, I haven't disclosed that one yet, but the Coal Millionaire is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Dorothy's story, and then the Prince Regent, because most of the time when you think of Prince George, who the Regency is named after, because his father, George III, went a little insane. You lose Americas, you just, Hamilton should have taught everybody, the story, right? George loses his mind a little bit, George III, and so his son is the regent. Well, once again, he has these favorites. So there is a composer that is one of his favorites. He literally takes custody of this young man because he thinks that the father's a ne'er-do-well, pays for his education, even sends a stipend to his mother who's living in Sweden or something like this, right? You just, George Bridge Tower, you just would never, I've never knew that before, that George was this kind version of Prince George, because normally you see him as a drunk, you see him as just gluttonous and just given to all kind of depravity. But there's this other side of him that research has, that my research has shown me, that gives me all kinds of new respect for him because of how he to me, he didn't look at color, which goes back to the big Bridgerton controversy, right? Of is Queen Charlotte a woman of color? I'm thinking more and more that she.
I mean, I definitely have heard. There are questions, there are paintings where people are like, maybe, maybe not. I mean, I think that the historical information, the historical consensus is still up for grabs, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised. And that is one of those other things that I think is so interesting, especially when you're writing historical fiction and historical romance, is the way the research can make your mind change. Because you're right, I mean, I grew up reading Regency romance, and everyone, the Prince Regent is like almost a clownish character, off the page, him barely, it's like an overgrown toddler, just people feeding him grapes and him throwing temper tantrums and being like laced into this massive corset. And King George III is just, off somewhere, wandering, talking to himself. You don't necessarily get these more layered, nuanced versions of the real historical characters, let alone the ones that we're creating to like inhabit this space.
Exactly.
And I feel like it just makes more and more room for then more and more stories. I did want to talk about one thing with all of your books, certainly the two, working on 3 that we have done so far together, and that's children.
Mm-hmm.
In this time period, in your stories. Again, I feel like a lot of time in Regencies, although Bridgerton, that series is a good exception to this rule, is children are sort of seen but not heard. So yes. There might be younger siblings somewhere, or some prior character is off and has had a baby, but you don't necessarily see people interacting with the kids in the course of the book. And you definitely see that, in your stories, kids are really the drivers of the plot. And how did you decide to make them so central to what's going on?
2 things. The Bridgerton series, watching that dynamic, the family dynamics, has always touched me. I thought that was very well done. Julia Quinn did an excellent job of not making them just little, because sometimes when you see kids, they're just like, here's my statue, here's my bookcase, here's my kid, right?
Right, exactly.
There's no personality, there's no way of them interacting, because it's really just another fixture in the room and whatnot. And I love the way that she really incorporated the children in the story. And so I was watching, one of my guilty pleasures, watching some movies, and I was watching 3 Men and a Baby. And I just said, you know what? If I could pull that off, that would be really funny. Of seeing these, like, particularly like in A Duke, the Lady and the Baby, we have a military man. He's a commander on the field. He's Wellington's strategist. And to see him with a little baby, I thought that could be really cute and heartwarming to see these tough, larger than life men just reduced to nothing but singing nursemaids. I think it was very special.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is the Duke doesn't quite know what babies can do at what age. So that's a sort of training schedule for this 4-month-old that is not quite what is going to be possible.
He's determined to make a man of this baby.
For 6 months, marching in formation. Yeah, I find it so fun. I always think it's so great in romances when you create this whole world of characters. I think one of the things romance readers love, particularly when reading series, or I will say I love, because I am a romance reader, is sort of visiting and seeing people grow and change and seeing how those interactions develop. And with your books, I feel like you've created such a world for people to inhabit that sort of touches on all parts of society and class and race. And it's just so great to sort of see that develop now over 2 books and 3, but we won't talk about the 3rd one yet because that's in the future. To see that happen. Do you find yourself, are you the kind of writer where it's like, my characters are just doing what my characters do? Are you like a heavy time plotter? I don't know if I've ever asked you this before.
Yeah, I'm a hybrid, so I go back and forth, right? So I spend a lot of time and I think about what are the goals that each one of these characters have to do. And each one of them have to have real unique goals, and it can't be to fall in love and have no, they have to have something serious
Right.
that has to happen. So Patience has to get custody of her son back. That is her goal. Doesn't matter what else is happening. The house could be on fire. She needs to get her son back. And so, you work through those goals, you work through their belief systems. And then, but once I set up those signposts, I will pants a little bit because I want to see, like we're working through their perspectives, and you just see what happens. And, a lot of the Duke's characteristics become, they get bigger and bigger,
right,
and bigger because I'm letting them be themselves in these things. But I try and get to know them very well before I start writing so that I feel comfortable because, slight control friction.
Just the tiniest bit.
As you get
I think
those 3 a.m. emails,
you would never, not ever. I think that's a classic writer trait, to just want to inform everyone what's going on when it occurs to you, which is sometimes at 3 a.m. A thing that I really love in A Duke's a Lady and a Baby, which sort of ties into the tropes conversation, because one of my longtime favorite tropes has been secret baby. And I feel like in this, you have secret mom, where Patience is sort of in various disguises, trying to get to her kid, not reveal that it's her kid. Do you have any favorite tropes? Do you have any that you've like turned on their head for what you work on?
My favorite trope, which is actually the next book, is I've always wanted to do an amnesia story. You can't like some tropes you can revisit, like Friends to Lovers, you can revisit a number of times. You can only probably do maybe 1 or 2 amnesia books, so it's got to be really good. Because
right.
And I forget the reasons why, but you really have to be with an amnesia story. Probably 2 out.
I think probably on the list of fact versus fiction, amnesia and Dukes are not as prevalent as romance novels and TV and movies would like us to believe.
Yeah, but so it's kind of like, particularly in Jamina's story. Jamina is someone you meet in A Duke, the Lady and the Baby. That's her and Daniel's story. Her and P. Daniel Thackeray, because the horrible hero names continue. That's been a thing. Horrible hero names.
We'll talk. Do you want to explain to all our viewers what you mean?
All right. So I as part of my research, naming a character is extremely, extremely important. So I have this huge list of Regency hero names, Regency heroine names, and for some reason, Busick stuck out to me for the hero name. And one of the things are people are like, why Busick? You could have called him Bradford. You could have called him something really, really cool. Why Busick? Because it's so horrible. I'm like, your mama named you Busick. You need love. It's got to have just love. So now it's a thing. So each one of the heroes, their real first names are horrible.
You got to give them a stumbling block right out the gate.
So can you love this horrible named hero? Or just make a nickname up for him or something.
Yeah.
These are questions. But that's, so Busick is the first one, et cetera, are the latter 2 guys.
Yeah. I have to say, I do love fake dating. Love it. Obsessed with it. I'm trying to think if I have any others. Those 2. Oh, Locked In, Snowed In, One Bed. For some reason, like every time I am there for it.
Yes. Oh, and I do know now one of your all-time.
Oh, I forgot to even mention this. I love a road trip. I love it.
Love the road trip.
I love a road trip, and I gently suggested a road trip to Vanessa for the next manuscript she's working on, which I think, as happens often, this is a little insight into editorial life. I think as editors, especially those of us who are not also authors, we suggest things that we think are easy, but it turns out writing them is quite difficult. So we'll just throw something out there like do a road trip. Or I've said to authors in the past, like, oh, you should have like a country house party where they're just all away for a week. And they come back 2 months later and they're like, what did you do? I'm like, was that hard? I'm so sorry. But it turned out great.
Yes.
Sure. Every time, I'm sure it turns out well. So very, very excited.
Essie is a wizard, right? She'll just throw a plot bomb in the middle. And it's like, I would have never come up with that. It's like, it makes the book. It really does make the book. So I love our partnership. And
it's so fun for me because then I read the manuscript and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I did not know I was going to get all this. I thought I was making an offhand comment and now I have this like beautiful thing before me. So that is always very, very fun for me. I do want to talk just a little bit more about An Earl, a Girl, and a Toddler, which will be on sale at the end of April, which is the 2nd. And I wanted to specifically talk about our Earl because I think he will be a surprise to some people, going back to our historical accuracy conversation. So can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, P. Daniel Thackeray is the barrister in A Duke, the Lady and the Baby. He's Lady Shrewsbury's nephew. And if everyone can remember, he is mixed race. He's a blackamoor. And one of the things that you seldom see, first of all, you seldom see in print a Black Earl. You seldom see titled individuals of color in Regency settings. And so this was extremely important to me, his characterization. The other thing that you're going to see is you're going to see his world, because oftentimes when you do see characters of color, and if I think about it, my very first book, Unmasked Heart, I did it myself. I put 1 or 2 persons of color in the book, and that's it. Right? So they're surrounded in this environment. You see them navigating, but you don't get to see necessarily a lot of their culture. You don't see any of their additional people in their communities and whatnot. So it's very important to me that when you see Daniel has been surviving and thriving within the Ton, within Regency society as one of the Crown's best barristers. So we go back to one of the subtle premises is Prinny has favorites. Prinny has blackamoor favorites, and Daniel, because he's a Socratic thinker, has been one of his favorites. So they get special education, special access, and their careers are whatever they choose to go into. Everybody knows this is Prinny's man, so they're not going to mess with him, not necessarily. And so he has been navigating the court system, and you're going to see his world. And there are challenges in this world. He's got a brand new boss now. There's a new Lord Mayor, and that's the man who's basically the head jurist in the courts. He's a little suspicious of Daniel. He doesn't really like him to be there. He thinks he's used these privileges, and he's just really hard on Daniel. Then you have his aunt, who he loves dearly, Lady Shrewsbury, who's a wild woman, always having these widows breaking into things. And he's like, I'm a man of the courts and you're,
just out there breaking the law every day.
And he's got to cover for her because she's doing it for the right reasons, because Widow's Grace is trying to help women who've been defrauded and imprisoned or lost custody of children. They're trying to do some really great things. But they've taken it that they're going to break the law to do it. They don't care. They're going to do what they need to do. And so he's trying to navigate all these different things. And then he's a single dad. So he has this beautiful daughter, Hope. and he's got a lot of worries, and he's widowed. He's been widowed for about 2 years now, and he's like, I used to be a very popular man. Maybe I need to do about this. But you get to see his, in addition to all these different things that I just went through, you get to see his community, his friends, his poker or his wit playing friends. Wit. I think it's a card game. And so you're going to get to see his friends, his Black community. You're going to get to actually experience that, and I don't think that's ever been done in a Regency book.
I mean, I can't think of it. You know, it's so fascinating. So I've been doing this for 15 years. Mm-hmm. And the changes I have seen in historical romance in the last 5 years have been really extraordinary in terms of, to your point, creating worlds that aren't just, oh, we had one person sort of dropped into the middle of what you've always seen, and nothing about them is really at all different from what you saw before. If even that, you know, from me being able to name the historical romance authors of color off the top of my head on one hand easily, to now I'm like, I wouldn't even attempt it because I know I would forget people. You've written 24 books?
23, 25, somewhere in that number.
yeah, right around there. What have you seen in the time that you've been writing? Good, bad.
I have seen. I would say I've been pretty blessed. I've always had really great editors. With, you know, the earlier part of my career, it was a tough sell. I literally whitewashed my first book to get it published traditionally, because, you know, at the time, you know, people either didn't realize that Eva Rutland had preceded me with writing Regencies, or they didn't feel that I was capable, or that people would buy a story that was written by me. And so you get to a point where you start having to prove yourself. So I went indie after my first traditionally published book, and started gaining some success and notoriety. One of my first books, The Bargain, just from its cover alone, sold like 1,000 units that first week.
Wow.
To kind of prove, because that's the whole thing. You have to prove there's an audience. And
right.
At the time, the big publishers weren't trying to prove it. They had their numbers, they had their things, and they knew what they needed to do. But now you fast forward, I feel wasn't very, very privileged. My books have hit the shelves. You know, it's so exciting. Seeing people hold up my books, and all different kinds of people reading them and enjoying the stories, looking forward to the next in the series. It's humbling and exciting, but this wouldn't have happened, as he said, 5 years ago. I honestly say it wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. I think we're in the cusp of change, and it's really within the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking in the last couple months about the sort of absolutely unpredictable, could not have planned for timing of A Duke's a Lady and a Baby, which I don't even have the date in front of me when we signed the contract, because people don't realize, I mean, books are signed, you know, a year and a half maybe before you see them on the shelf. And I am many things, but I cannot predict the future. So we were just like very excited. We thought, you know, I mean, we thought the book was great and that people would love it, but you don't know what's going to happen until it's out there, and sort of seeing the reception from the romance community, from authors reading it, you know, before it was even on sale, and then reviews, and then just seeing the response of readers out there, and then rolling into Bridgerton. And then you've got this amazing historical fiction coming up in July with Island Queen. And just sort of seeing all this stuff happen. I mean, we just sort of sometimes, you know, get on Zoom and stare at each other. It's sort of amazing that
Essie's a wizard. I still go with Essie's a wizard.
Okay, sure. I mean, I will take it. I will take it. Because we certainly on our side, you know, on the publisher side, and I've been lucky enough to work with people like Alyssa Cole as well, that when sort of, particularly outside the romance world, journalists or whatever pop up and they're like, oh, do you have anyone who can speak to like this thing we're hearing about with diversity in historical romance? And I'm like, well, funny you should ask. We actually are working with the perfect person to talk about this. And it's just been so great inside the house because there is an aspect of publishing books where as a publisher, you have no control over it. So you can love and love a book and know it's amazing and know the author is amazing. And I have had this happen where I'm just like, it just goes out there in the world. And for some reason, probably because there are 2 million books published every year, people don't find their way to it. And so to have a book that we all love so much out there with people who love it so much, and to have, you know, people talking about it in all these different ways from all these different angles has just been so much fun and real true bright spot of 2020. And went on sale at a time when we desperately needed bright spots. It's just been so fun. And now there are going to be 2 books from you this year. I'm correct in that, right?
Yeah, so we've got
Girl, the Girl,
and the Toddler. And
2 new books coming out.
No, I should actually have one of these handy, right?
You have one behind you there. I don't know if that's actually it or just the cover.
Got that, oh.
Island Queen, which is historical fiction and being published from HarperCollins, where I used to work, and edited by my dear friend, Rachel Kahn, who, funnily enough, a year ago today, I had lunch with her. So I'm like, oh, I can like think of the things I did. Seeing Rachel and chatting about Vanessa was, you know, one of the last lessons I did, and neither one of these books was written yet. And now here they are. You wrote a lot of words in the last year.
435,000 words. And I used some of those.
Some people won't get to see. A lot of them you will get to see. So I feel like we've been jabbering on. I don't know if there are any audience questions. I could truly talk to Vanessa forever. So if there's anything people want to ask us, I know Vanessa would be happy to answer.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing such a fun conversation. I feel like I learned so much. I'm sure our audience members did as well. We do have a question from Brenda right now. And Brenda, I think I'm actually going to allow you to ask this one yourself. So I'm going to promote you to be a speaker. If you don't want to speak, that's okay. I can pull you back down.
Good evening, ladies. How are you?
Hello.
Hi, Brenda.
Vanessa, I love your books, first of all. I have been reading you for several years. 2 of your books that I've read, most of your books, the conversation flows very smoothly, like just everyday conversation. But 2 of the books that I read, one was the Unveiling Love, episode 1. Mm-hmm. And then one that I just finished reading, which was Madeline's Protector. Mm-hmm. The conversations didn't flow. They were just kind of like that stilted and clipped Jane Eyre movie type of conversation, which sometimes in a book I find very hard to follow. What makes you decide when to use which style?
Well, those 2 books are my older books. So that the Madeline's Protector was my very first book. So that's the book where I needed to prove. So I followed the stylistic patterns of the Regency books I had been reading, the research patterns of the dialect, etc. And I wrote it, and it got traditionally published, and I felt very accomplished, but my soul was empty. Because it wasn't the stories I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell stories of my foremothers and forefathers in this particular society. And so the more I got comfortable in my skin and more comfortable in telling the story, you can see it in my writing. And I'm just blessed that you can tell the difference. That lets me know I'm doing something.
Yes, thank you. I hadn't found Madeline's Protector before. I just recently found it. I don't know how it just happened to pop up, but I'm going, oh no, this is just like that other one.
The audiobook makes it better.
Does it? Okay. All right. I'm like Essie, though. I'm not an audiobook reader because with audiobooks, it doesn't make me pay attention. With the other books,
that's a standalone, so you can kind of skip that.
I could do it. Okay. All right. I'll think about that.
I just want to jump in and say something about audiobooks, which is that I know the books that we work on together, and Island Queen, Vanessa, you have amazing narrators, and I don't know if you wanted to just mention them at all.
Oh my gosh. So Bonnie Turpin does the audio for A Duke, the Lady, and the Baby, and she is re-signed to do An Earl, the Girl, and a Toddler. Bonnie has done so many, The Hate You Give, but to hear the Caribbean accents, the English accents, the Scottish, I mean, it blew my mind. I'm not a big audiobook person either, because I like to see the words and see how, because, you know, as an author, you sit here, you do two things. You analyze sentence structure, you analyze stuff a lot, and it's easier when you're seeing the print. But if you just want to put that part of your brain to sleep and just enjoy the story, the audiobook makes such a difference. And so just listening to her, I could hear my grandmother. I could hear those tones, and it was just so exciting. And once again, you will never see her at a Regency done like this, and it's just so exciting. And for those who you know, for Island Queen and who've watched Bridgerton's, Lady Danbury, Ando,
yeah.
Ando, thank you, because I'm Southern and I screw everything up. But Lady Danbury, she is she's narrating Island Queen. So once again, it's going to be another phenomenal performance.
I am seeing another question in the chat here from Hannah, who asked, what authors inspire your writing and what are the books that inspire you? Big questions.
Ooh, I'm gonna let Essie go first because she's gonna bring out all the good stuff.
Oh, well, I do not write. I always tell my authors, I'm like, I always feel guilty because the thing I always hated most as an English student, I loved studying literature. I hate revising. I hate rewriting. I hate everything about that, which is what it is to be an author. And as an editor, I you know, it's my job to make people do that, but I hear that you writers like it, so I don't feel too bad about it. What books inspire me? Well, I'll say something I read recently. I recently read Big Friendship, which is a book by, I'm now going to blank on their names, Aminata So and her best friend. His last name is Friedman. We'll look it up. But it came out in 2020, and it is a book about friendship at a distance. You know, when one moved to the other coast, Anne Friedman, when Anne moved to California, what it is to have an interracial friendship. Anne is white and Amina is Black. What it is to have so many things go unsaid in a friendship that the friendship starts to split, and how you can rebuild it because people see you as such a pair. And as somebody who friendship is so important to me, and I feel like it's one of those relationships we don't talk about enough when we talk about relationships. And then to have this book come out that was not written for this during the pandemic when we are away from our friends, and it all being about how to maintain that kind of friendship. I just found myself just thinking about so many things differently, and also just seeing that, you know, this beautifully written book about this vital interaction that we all have in our lives that often gets sort of dismissed or put to the side for romantic love or parental love or all the other types of love in our life. But the friendship love is so key to what we do. And one of the things I love as an editor is I work with so many authors who create these really great friendship groups in their books. And that is such a huge part of their stories, as well as whatever, you know, romance or mystery or whatever plot is in there. So that book for me, Big Friendship, I told all my friends to read it. I'm like, we can have a book club and talk about it. I feel like it taps into something that's just so important, and even more so now.
Absolutely. I'm as you will know, I love friendship aspect in the book. And I'm not talking about the friendship between the hero and the heroine. I'm talking about the friendship with the heroine and her girls. or whomever is in her circle, as well as the hero who's in their circle, because to me that's another level of romance, because they are helping you do life, and I like reflecting that in the books. My hero of all heroes, I would have to say, is Maya Angelou. There's a probably little known book, something about getting married at Christmas. I love the rhythm in her language. So it's like I can hear the beats as I'm reading it. And to me, that is extremely important. From a romance side, of course, Beverly Jenkins, Brenda Jackson, Grace Burrows, Sarah McLean, Julia Quinn.
Just looking at your keeper shelf.
Yes, I'm looking because I can't remember. Linda Windsor, and I like Linda's books before she started writing the Christian books, as I say, before they were saved, as well as after. And another good one, Talia Hibbert. I think she's amazing. She's amazing. Such vulnerable characters, just being so true to themselves, yet still being open for love. I think she does an amazing job.
Excellent.
So I hope that answers the question. We went from here to Michelle's.
Yeah, I know. That's what we do. I told you we get to chatting.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that one, especially as we're starting to wrap up here. Related, you talked a little bit about romance readership and who's reading your novels. I'm curious, who do you think needs to read your novels? Do you have, if you could shove your books into someone's hands or a group's hands and say, read this, do you have anyone that you think?
That's a very
great question.
I guess if anybody is extremely stressed out, my circle is getting more laid back. Like we were all stressed around this time, March, when stuff started closing down, but now we're like pandemic veterans. So, so the anxiety level is somewhat coming down. But people who are stressed out from job problems, as Essie was saying, we're now distant from our friends. So, we do Zoom cocktail hours and things like that to try and feel connected, but it's still not quite. Just being able to disconnect your brain and just be in a different world where you're not worried about your present day and you're worried about somebody else's problems, I think is why romance books are so great, because they nurture, they take you on a journey, and you're safe knowing there's going to be a happy ever after.
I would agree with all of that. I would also love to give your books, romances in general, to English literature departments. I have some friends who are English literature professors who have started romance courses. Catherine Ash, who writes historical romance, is also a professor. She had a romance course at Duke, and she taught other things there too. And I have a couple other friends who are professors who have started to incorporate romance into some of what they teach. But I just feel like, as somebody who I have a master's in English, I loved it, but I just think English departments could really benefit from getting to know the romance genre, particularly as creative writing departments. Romance writers, and because the romance community is so strong, I feel like there are some really good conversations about crafts that happen. I mean, what you were just saying, Vanessa, about how you like to see the sentences and the shape of them. I think sometimes people don't realize how much of that happens in romance and in genre fiction. And so I would love to get, as much as I think it's starting, I would love to get more and more English departments sort of reading and teaching romance fiction.
And I think that would help in the bias, because romance is a billion-dollar industry, and there's still such a bias against it, primarily because it's dominated by women. Women are writing these books, and that in our culture means it must be bad.
Right. How could they possibly have anything good? It's funny, there's that trope of it's just some bored housewife who didn't have anything better to do. And I'm like, even that bored housewife has actually plenty to say, as well as the fact that, you know, maybe she's bored because she had to give up her career because she had kids and you couldn't do both those things. You know, that I think that people are realizing not just the many layers to romance, but the many layers to the people who write them. And I think that's been a really fun thing in this part of the 21st century that we're inhabiting.
So we are knocking right up against the end of this event. I saw one question from JB that just showed up in the chat. I'm going to ask it really quick if you think you could give a quick answer. How do you connect to new readers or those who shy away from historical books?
One, these are new stories. So it's not any idea you have of romances that have been written 20, 30 years ago. These are different. They're not bodice rippers. The stories have evolved so that we can meet you where you are. You're going to see yourself in these romances, whether it's today's contemporary or today's historical. You're going to see yourself. Somebody has written one that is you, whether that is, you know, Black, whites, Hispanic, Asian, etc., transgendered. They're stories now for everyone, and that's, I think, the most exciting thing about today. It's so much more open than it used to be. So if you've tried it in the past, or you've been sneaking those things from under your grandma's couch, put those back. Those are still lovely now. We're not burning any books. We're not banning anything. But go to the Kensington website and start downloading. Go to Grassroots, order books from them. They've got new things that are just going to blow your mind. They have access to whole different worlds, and historicals, particularly if you are worried as a person of color or worried about stories, there is joy in romance. That is the thing we write about. So even if times are difficult, you're going to see joy, you're going to see it win. So you are protected and safe. So just like my friends that are stressed out that I recommend romance to, persons of color, people who are worried about these stories because they think they're going to see things that are going to upset them. You might. I'm not gonna, you know, some of us may go different places, but overall, it is a safety net because you're going to see love win.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for that answer, and really for this entire conversation. This was such a fun conversation to be a part of. And Vanessa and Essie, I so appreciate your willingness to share your time and your insight and your stories with us. To our audience members, support Vanessa by buying her books, many books here with us. You can find them by clicking the links that I pasted into the chat or on our website. Your support really does help small bookstores like us stay open and bring authors to our community. I also have to give the little spiel. We do have more events coming up for Romance Literature Month. We are hosting Inara Scott next week, who's a local author in Corvallis, for a talk called Romance Novel Curious. And we have authors of queer romance, Corellia Stutz-Waters and Alexandria Bellafleur, for a conversation on the 25th. These events are all on our website and our Facebook, so I would love to see you there. And on that note, thank you so much again, everyone. We hope to see you back for more events soon. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.